You're currently watching video E4.p2-29, which is the beginning video for the unit E4.p2I. With this concept and these learning objectives, we're going to be learning about major global wind belts, more specifically trade winds, prevailing westerlies, and also polar easterlies. Where they're located, what causes them, and how they affect our global climate because of their movement throughout the entire and around the entire Earth. The second part is we're going to talk about the vertical components and how the vertical components regarding the types of air that move based upon its warmth and its moisture content, and also how it travels to particular locations throughout the entire world. We're going to talk about the distribution of rainforests and deserts. So in this particular video, we're only going to focus on the major global wind belts. All right, so we'll talk about where they're located, how they're formed, so on and so forth, okay? So as you're going through here, your simple task is to kind of fill in the notes as we begin talking about these different types of air masses, talking about how air is created, how winds are created, and then how these actually are distributed and move across the entire world because of the Earth's rotation. So we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll be looking at global winds. So I've already talked about the actual objective, and again I'll just reiterate it in case you missed it. Our primary focus for today is going to be based upon the major global wind belts. That's what we're going to primarily focus on today. All the other materials and other objectives here about the components of vertical components of the global distribution of rainforests and deserts will be covered in the coming videos. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is Coriolis effect. Now, some of you may have heard this term before. Some of you may even understand or know about the Coriolis effect. But I'm going to start by talking about here and give you a quick little story about the Coriolis effect from a very, very smart guy that I follow. He's a writer for Discover magazine, and he's an astronomist. He does a lot of things in science and also worked for NASA, I should say. But nonetheless, we'll get to his story in just a moment. Okay, so here's what the Coriolis effect is. All right, the Coriolis effect says because of the Earth as it spins on its axis, as it's rotating, what causes the winds to start to curve is because of this actual rotation. So when you have the Earth and it's got its axis, you know, the tilt that we've got, and we're actually rotating, spinning on our axis, it's because of this that causes the air to deflect and move in the northern hemisphere to the right, and also then moving to the left in the southern hemisphere. All right? So that's the beginning stages of what the Coriolis effect is that as the Earth is spinning, it causes winds to not travel straight, but instead to start to curve and deflect. Now, the most common misconception that comes up with the Coriolis effect is this. Water in my toilet bowl or in my sink or in my bathtub is going to rotate clockwise. So as it goes down the drain, it's going to rotate clockwise in the northern hemisphere, and in the southern hemisphere, it's going to go counterclockwise. I remember even when I was a student in high school and even back in middle school when we started learning about the Coriolis effect and having heard it, I remember my teachers talking about this, and I have gone back, not recently, but when I first started teaching, to go back and kind of correct them about this and point out to them what their errors in their understanding about this particular effect were, and as to why it's not true, why in the northern hemisphere it goes clockwise and then in the southern hemisphere counterclockwise. So as I went back to them, I explained, look, I understand that you're talking about wind deflecting to the right, so that would be clockwise, and wind deflecting to the left in the southern hemisphere, and that would be counterclockwise, so that just makes sense because the Earth's rotation, gravitation, a lot of different things, that's why it flushes in that direction. Well, I got a book when I was in college called Bad Astronomy. You're going to see a picture of it pop up right here. And in this book, it talks about a lot of misconceptions, people that are teachers or people that are just not in the world of education that have misguided information from their former past teachers, or maybe just from their own knowledge and seeking it out about science concepts. And one of them is the Coriolis effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the blog and the website for this particular site, which is called Bad Astronomy. Again, you'll see through the Discover magazine, they have a blog. The person that writes it is here. His name is Phil Platt. And Phil Platt started this whole Bad Astronomy on a platform of creating a website that would talk about different misconceptions. And you can see right here, badastronomy.com. You click on misconceptions, and there's a whole bunch of these ones. And these are basically things that he talks about in his book. And he has, since the book I've read, he's actually written another with new updates of information. And again, one of them right here, close to home, flush with pride, the Coriolis effect in your potty. All right, and as it says, water spins down a drain one way in the northern hemisphere and the other in the southern hemisphere. And, as it says right here, that water doesn't just spin. So, there's a lot more to it than just talking about, why it does it. Now, it doesn't mean that the Coriolis effect can't cause water to rotate, particularly in a space. However, as you read through here and he gives this concept, there has to be some sort of slight variance, not so even planed, so it's kind of tilted. So that begins the actual water moving downhill, and because the drain is set up, and as you can see in this picture right here, they removed the actual plug to the drain so it would cause that vortex and that spinning to actually take place. Now, there's a lot of things right here that will go into greater detail, talking about physics and so on and so forth, but Here's the interesting story that really hit home to me and that I share every year with students regarding the Coriolis effect. There's this person in Kenya, you can see it right here, in this very small little town that's actually located right on the equator. And this became what you and I know as a tourist trap. What they would do is they would load people in these large buses, tourist groups, to go out and look in the desert of Kenya. And they would literally go out and go see some of these animals. And one of their stops was at this man's little business. And at this business, he had these tanks. And you can see these tubs or tanks right here. And they had a hole in the bottom of them where the water would drain. And as soon as people get off the bus, in the book, he starts talking about, he was so excited to see them. Come on, I have a great story to tell you. And he would gather them around, and, there were signs that you're at the equator, and then he would take you to the southern hemisphere and then the northern hemisphere and talk about some certain things regarding science. But one of them was his selling point about the Coriolis effect. And as it says right here, this man's nonsense was actually captured in one of the BBC TV specials, From Pole to Pole, which was put then on PBS. And he talks about the actual presentation, about what he did, and explaining things to the people that were there, and talking about the Coriolis effect and how it causes the water to drain in the northern hemisphere, and a lot of different things. But the fact is that he got called out by the person that was actually there as one of the tourists, a part of the group. He listened to the guy spiel, and at the very end, he raised his hand and he said, I don't agree with what you have to say. And he's like, oh, you don't know, I just showed you. And he's explaining this, trying to argue with this man, and he demanded, literally, the person that was working for PBS demanded his money back, along with the people that were on the group, because what he showed was false science. And what the man did is he literally created these tubs, and as he dumped the water in, you couldn't really see, but the tubs had a tilt to them. They looked to be even, but they were developed so that there would actually be a slight variance and a change that would create that type of circulation. It wasn't because of the Earth's rotation. It wasn't because of the Coriolis effect. It was because of somebody's engineering design created it to cause that to rotate and flush down the sink in that particular location. So a good emphasis about what people are out there saying and doing that necessarily doesn't apply to science itself.